Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Melinda Pierson. Sorry for the quick delay while I got the screen set up. I am the chair of the Department of Special Education, and I am so excited that you are joining me for this webinar today. I sure wish we could be face-to-face. It would be a ton of fun, but I'm going to talk you through some different strategies on helping challenging students in the classroom. And I think we all need this. I'm still learning every day. I want to give you a little bit of my background so you understand why I need this presentation as well. So I actually was a Cal State Fullerton student. I did my master's and my learning handicapped credential. That's the old version of the mild moderate education specialist credential. But I did both of those at Cal State Fullerton after attending Westmont College, where I earned my single subject credential and my bachelor's in English. So I also have an English credential, which is why I absolutely love literacy and anything related to literacy, but my second love is behavior. So I have worked myself as a teacher in San Marcos Unified School District, as well as Ontario Montclair School District, and I taught kindergarten through 12th grade, but mostly I did junior high and high school. So talk about behaviors, I've been there. So I get it, I understand life, that it's not always easy. I have been at Cal State Fullerton since 2001, and I've also taught at Biola University, and prior to Cal State Fullerton, I was at Cal Poly Pomona for 3 years as an assistant professor. I have consulted in multiple districts, most recently Anaheim Union High School District, Montebello Unified School District, Compton Unified School District, Orange Unified School District, all very diverse, very interesting and wonderful school districts. I've done a lot of work in San Diego County as well. And the reason I need this behavior presentation is because I lead study abroad programs to some really interesting places. I hope that you can join me someday. That's another story for another time. But I do study abroads to an orphanage in Haiti, where the behaviors are really difficult because there are a lot of kids living in tight quarters with very, very little training. And so a lot of these techniques are with some really difficult situations in mind, as well as my experience in special education at multiple levels of education with some really difficult students who have had some really difficult backgrounds. So I'm really coming to you with the experience, but also with the lifelong learning brain that I always want to be improving my practice and supporting others. So that's a little bit of a background on me. So what's our plan of action for today? We are going to discuss and really analyze, why are challenging kids challenging? What's their makeup? How did they get there? Are they doing this to just make our lives crazy and so much harder? Are they doing this so that they don't have any friends, so that no one wants to play with them on the playground, or so that they're not loved? Why do they behave this way? I don't get it. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to analyze some possible reasons. Obviously, there are many, but we're going to talk about some possible reasons. We are going to learn a totally new way of looking at behavior. So let's get away from some traditional thought. Traditional thought's not always bad. That's not the point, but let's try to find some new ways of looking at it and new strategies, because a lot of what we're doing and a lot of what we're taught in schools just isn't working. We really have to come up with a new plan in many instances. So if you're coming here today and you're really kind of stuck and you've got a kid you're really struggling with, then let's create a plan of action for changing our perspectives and our responses so that we feel more confident. We're like, okay, we can do this, we've got this. And we're gonna just really get together on some ideas on how we're gonna get there. So let's go. Okay, so you're with me here. We're going to talk really quickly about the hierarchy of learning. So learning, esteem, and self-love Relationship and love, safety, and physiological aspects all make up the hierarchy of learning. So, what does that mean? So, as I talk through really briefly each one, I want you to think back on your own childhood. Did you personally have each of these areas covered? We don't always. And I think as you think about your own life and maybe your own behaviors, maybe some therapy you've gone through or some friendship venting and sharing that you've grown yourself, and you can put yourself sometimes in this situation. So learning, it's related to motivation, creativity, problem solving, memory, curiosity. The next one, so self-love is going to be self-esteem, self-respect, confidence, respect of others, respect by others. Did you always get respected by others? Did you have that desire to achieve? What about relationship and love? So friends, teachers, the administrator of a school, counselors, your family. Where did you get love from any of those possible aspects in your life, those people in your life? When you look at safety, did you have physical safety? Did you have emotional safety? That's a really big issue for a lot of our students. Were you free from bullies, or were you sometimes bullied? Were you free from harsh punishment? I know that some of us who are older, harsh punishment was a thing that happened a lot in our pasts. And I think that the new generations maybe aren't as bad with harsh punishment, but it's something that many people dealt with. What about the physiological aspects of your life? Did you have any poverty issues that included hunger and thirst? Did you have an opportunity to have a non-chaotic home so that you were rested and you weren't kept up all night by a loud TV or partying that was going on at the home, that type of thing? So these are things that create a good learning experiences and aspects that contribute to positive learning for the students in our classrooms. So let's look at what the experts need. So the experts are our kids. These are the people that we're relying on to teach, right? The people that we're working with in our lives. And what do they say? So a survey of hundreds of kids just a few years ago, kids reported back on 4 main categories. They said they wanted to be less stressed and less overwhelmed. They wanted to have better student-teacher relationships, better peer relationships, and they wanted to have more fun. Did you see anywhere where they said they needed more academics? No. They just wanted to feel calmer, be believed in, be more accepted, and be understood. Did you need any of these things? What did you need specifically? Would you agree with these 4 categories? If you look back on your life, what did you personally need? So how can we make this happen? How can we have these 4 main categories come to life? Well, we probably have to start kind of at the beginning and look at what is a distressed kiddo. What does that mean? A kid who's distressed. So we have 2 kinds of kids. We have a kid who's hyper aroused and a kid who's hypo aroused. So hyper aroused means that they have an increase in tension in their lives. They have increased anxiety that they're manifesting. They show that they're panicked much quicker, a lot of drama. They have more rage, so they act out a lot more. They have a reduction of pain tolerance or possibly even insomnia. So how does that manifest in your classroom? And what might you be seeing? What types of behaviors in this type of a distressed kid? It's someone who is unable to focus or sit still, someone who cannot follow the rules or just won't follow the rules. They're aggressive, they could be argumentative, they might be anxious before tests, they're impulsive, they're a risk taker. So that's one type of kid. And I'm guessing that you're here today because you have some of these behaviors you're experiencing in your classrooms. Another type of kid is the hypo-aroused kid. that decrease in tension. So it's like a flattened affect. They're just there. That emotional indifference, they just don't care. They can be irritable. They're disengaged with you. They're disengaged with the class. They're disengaged with anything academic. They could be demonstrating depression. They could be defiant. They're withdrawing from peers. They just don't care about having those relationships. They're just not at school, or they're late. They avoid tasks. They could be forgetful. Overall, they just don't care. And you see this quite a bit more as we hit the secondary years of school, a lot more in high school than what we see in elementary school. So these are dysregulated kids. So we're really looking at kids that don't have that ability to regulate their behaviors, their emotions, themselves. So due to life experiences, some kids live in a chronic state of dysregulation. And this is my guess of the students in your classroom. So think about, I know that you're already thinking about a kid or two that you're dealing with on a daily basis. But think about that kid and think about their life experiences. So do you think that they have experienced childhood trauma, or that they're experiencing it now? And this, when childhood trauma occurs, a child feels out of control. They are scared. They feel worthless. They feel like they're unlovable. Nobody has ever shown them loved or demonstrated how to love. That creates great insecurity. And they also feel powerless, and they're endangered. They're just not safe. So obviously, you know, when trauma occurs is that a child can be neglected emotionally or physically. They're belittled, they're degraded, they're ridiculed. They're threatened physically, so obviously physical abuse, but emotional abuse as well, which includes being threatened to be left or abandoned, or not having the care that they need, just that neglect, not being loved, or not being shown affection. And so all of this creates dysregulated kids. And you would know from dealing with parents or not dealing with parents, if parents aren't involved at all, or in our kids who are homeless youth or foster youth. My husband and I have had 15 foster kids in and out of our home. And so this is something that we see commonly. And when we first started it, when the agency was interviewing us and we were going through that process, we were like, oh, but we don't have a perfect home. We really don't. And they said, but you know how to love. You don't have to have a perfectly clean home. You don't have to be engaging every single minute and keeping them interested in life every single minute, but you know how to show love. You know how to make sure they feel safe, that they feel secure, that they don't feel like they are going to be abandoned. So these are all things to think about with the kids that we are supporting on a daily basis in our classrooms. So let's talk about some states of trauma. So in utero, cortisol in the womb occurs when women who are pregnant are stressed, which means studies have shown that kids then have trouble paying attention later in life or solving problems. Focusing on academics is when they have had a very, very stressed out mother. Stress hormones in the mother actually physically changes her body. So it constricts blood vessels, which then reduces oxygen to the uterus. And this really creates a negative influence on the fetus's ability to develop the way that they should. So they don't have optimal development if the mom is chronically stressed. And this happens a lot of times if a mom is being abused, or if a mom is a poverty-stricken mom who doesn't have a safe place to live. So there are lots of things that can cause those stress hormones to be very highly elevated in her body and then change the actual development of the fetus. So again, talking about childhood trauma, if a child feels powerless, helpless, hopeless, they see the world as dangerous. And this really gives them a view of which to operate and behave in the world. This is a lasting imprint on them. So an example of some of this trauma would include separation from a parent, poverty, a very disruptive home life, a lot of moving a lot, being worried about having a place to live, having food insecurity, dealing with a serious illness or a death in a family. What about not having any rules? There's no set time to have to go to bed. There's no requirements to complete homework. There's no safety as far as abuse from siblings or other people in the home, which would include that violence aspect. So it could even be watching violence constantly on TV or video games. Other types of childhood trauma, parents who are depressed have also shown that absolute neglect and ignoring the child and having a parent who's just chronically down in the dumps has created a lot of insecurity and powerlessness in kids, which creates that trauma. So internal regulation. So, the body bears the burden. So a child who has not been loved and has really not had that experience of being secure in their home life, they do not have a regulatory system that can self-regulate. They cannot control their actions sometimes because they've never been taught how to self-regulate. So relationship drives the brain. So the regulatory role of the caregiver to the child is an essential ingredient to that normal development of the brain. So children of trauma have not been taught how to calm down through the context of a positive relationship. They have just not had it. So they've never been trained on those aspects that you and I might have had. So that means that they're unable to handle stress in a positive way or pain or anything that becomes overwhelming. What about a schoolwork assignment that's overwhelming? What about a person that comes up to them in the classroom and triggers them a little bit? That would be an overwhelming situation, and they are ill-equipped to be able to handle those situations. So external regulation is looking at the fact that a child who's had that past trauma, the chaotic, disruptive, and overwhelming experiences, they're going to continue to behave poorly and not in a positive way until new patterns are established. So a child can be taken out of trauma. We can remove them, but the trauma cannot be taken out of the child. So this is what we see in kids who have been in and out of many foster homes, who have been placed in a foster home after having traumatic experiences in their homes. This is why we hear of orphanages around the world where kids have just been left in cribs. They are removed from that neglect or that abuse out of that trauma, but the trauma still lives in them. So think about the fact that we know that environmental factors also play a role in controlling that external regulation. So think about why babies have lullabies. So lullabies and soft music actually change breathing patterns. So heart rates actually change with the correlation of the type of music we're listening to. So some days you just want that slow, chill music versus having some kind of loud beating music. And a good example of that is Chuck E. Cheese. So we know that for kids who have a lack of external regulation, Chuck E. Cheese's is not the place for them. Of course, Chuck E. Cheese has not been open during the pandemic. We know that, but too many loud noises, lights blinking on and off, and kids running everywhere is not going to help anybody that cannot control themselves and doesn't have that external regulation. So the same thing can be said about chaotic classrooms. So it's really our responsibility to help our students reach their full potential. So we're going to talk about how to do that very, very shortly. I just kind of have to build a foundation on why kids don't have that regulation. And I want you to think more about it and really try to get to know those kids that are kind of driving you nuts right now, because the behaviors are really, really challenging and they're really difficult for you to handle. So again, this presentation is going to be this foundation and then some strategies, and then you're going to pick some strategies that you are going to add to your repertoire. And you're also going to take a couple strategies out. So as we're talking, I want you to think about a couple things that you do that might be a little chaotic for these kids. And what are some things that we can do differently to create that classroom that's safe and where they can learn that calm, peaceful way of self-regulation. So if we look at the window of stress tolerance, when a child has a large window of stress tolerance, he has the ability to function well in life and at school. So wait, if he has intact executive functions, what does that mean? You always hear about executive functioning. Well, what does that mean? That means that he has the cognitive ability to control behavior. So he can control his attention and his focus, his working memory, and cognitive flexibility. And all of these things help kids to demonstrate the following. So self-control and their focus, right? Short-term memory and task initiation, emotional control, and also planning and organizing, time awareness, yet flexibility with that time, and interpersonal skills and logical sequential thinking. So let's talk about a recent kind of news story that we've seen a couple times on the news. So here's kind of a news clip. An 8-year-old boy who's arrested after violent attacks. So Tuesday, an 8-year-old student was handcuffed at his elementary school. Officers said he attacked his teacher, a principal, and a police officer. Reports indicate that the student became upset when his teacher told him he would not be going outside to the playground for recess with his classmates. The report made no mention as to the reason the student was being given this consequence. The student became angry and tried to run out of his classroom. His teacher stopped him and said it was at that point the student began throwing chairs and overturning desks. This teacher then called for help, and when school personnel came in to control the student, he began headbutting his teacher and kicking the principal. He was escalating in his violence and was threatening to bite. Police were called, and when they arrived, the student attempted to escape by opening a window. The police officer pulled the student back in only to be kicked in the head. These efforts failed to calm the student down. Police officials did not disclose if the student had any documented condition that would have contributed to this incident. Reports indicate the student is around 4 feet tall and weighs between 75 and 80 pounds. He was charged with disorderly conduct and assault and battery. So here we have Billy, who went from an angry state to being arrested and escorted out of his school by the police. He's 8 years old, 75 pounds. By breaking down the chain of events, let's see if we can clearly see how the interactions between this particular student, his teachers, the staff, and the police contributed to this escalation. So let's look first at the reports that indicated that the student became upset when his teacher told him he would not be going outside to the playground for recess with his classmates. The report made no mention as to the reason the student was being given this consequence. So the explanation. So let's just talk about a possible explanation. So Billy became upset over the consequence of not being allowed to go outside with the other kids. This consequence is really reasonable for the teacher to implement, but it's also reasonable for Billy because, he's only age 8, right? To be upset. So Billy really kind of wants to fit in and he wants to be normal compared to his classmates. So this is like developmentally appropriate for an 8-year-old, right? So Billy appears to have a history of trauma, though. We can just see that by this story. And this sends him into a state of deep fear because of this consequence. So the next little chain of events was that he became really angry and he tried to run out of the classroom. His teacher stopped him and said it was at that point that the student began throwing chairs and overturning desks. So let's talk about a possible explanation. Possible. So in this agitated and he was in angry state, Billy is operating from his limbic system. And he can't comprehend the logic of, if you don't behave, you don't go out to recess. It's unlikely that the teacher connects with Billy at an emotional level at this point, but rather explains the consequence in a really logical and rational manner. But Billy perceives the logical discussion from his teacher as a threat because he really can't understand what she's saying. He determines the situation is just unsafe. His body reacts, and he's now mobilized and equipped physiologically to defend. He slips into his flight mode and he attempts to leave. When he is stopped, he follows the fight flight sequence and switches into fight mode. So let's talk about the next chain of events. The teacher then called for help, and when school personnel came in to control the student, he began headbutting the teacher and kicking the principal. He was escalating in his violence and was threatening to bite. So, possible explanation, the school personnel came into the room to control Billy instead of regulate Billy. The control is perceived as a threat from a child who's in survival mode. Billy now goes from operating from his limbic system. He's just simply emotionally upset. He just wants to go out to recess, to operating from his reptilian brain. He's ready to preserve his life. He becomes primal, kicking and threatening to bite. He's like an animal under attack, fueled by his neurotransmitters to fight if his life depends on it. So, next chain of events, police were called, and when they arrived, the student attempted to escape by opening a window. The police officer pulled the student back in, only to be kicked in the head. So, in explanation, from Billy's perspective, the level of threat has been elevated exponentially. He switches into flight mode. He attempts to flee from the premises to ensure his survival. The officer is doing what's right for Billy's safety, so he pulls him back into the building. But Billy's brain determines that this physical touch is not a positive one, right? It's threatening. It's not rescuing him, it's threatening him. So now that escape is no longer viable, he switches once again into fight mode. And the thought of being arrested and, quote, in trouble with the law has absolutely no impact on Billy because he's operating from a bottom-up control system. So the chain of events, these efforts failed to calm him down. So the explanation really is, the question begs to be asked, what was actually done to calm him down? More than likely, his interactions with the teachers, the police, the admin didn't address his level of fear. Rather, it was attempting to control him, so his behavioral responses were negative. Chain of events continued. The last one, the police officials did not disclose if the student had any documented condition that would have contributed to this incident, but explanation, trauma is rarely seen as a condition that contributes to an episode such as this, but it really needs to be, don't you agree? We don't have this documented all the time, that you have a student who's been neglected, who a student has been abused. We don't know all the time the background of our student. We might not even know how chaotic of a home they live in, right? Because maybe your home wasn't chaotic. So your experiences weren't that of this kind of stress. You don't understand. You've never been there before. Your perceptions are not that home life as a child is chaotic, right? So for you, you don't have that history, so you just don't understand it as well. So I really think that this entire episode could have been avoided in the very moment that Billy was given the consequence for not being allowed to go out with the other students. What likely happened in that moment was that the teacher reminded Billy of why he was getting the consequence or why he would have to accept her decision as final. Instead, the teacher needed to connect with Billy in his limbic brain. So his relationships, his emotions. So using the power of her positive relationship with Billy, she could have connected with his fear of not being included with the other children and the fear of being a bad child. So let's actually give Billy some help. What about this conversation? The teacher says, Billy, this is going to be really hard, but you're not going to be able to go out to recess today because of what happened earlier. Billy says, but that's not fair. The teacher says, I know, this can't feel good for you. I understand. Billy says, but it wasn't my fault. He's fighting back. The teacher says, why don't you and I sit here and let's talk a little bit more so I can understand your perspective. Let me understand why you think it's not fair. So this teacher can spend, 10 minutes with Billy one-on-one to let him have a voice and help him to feel connected and understood. And this is time in with a teacher, not a time out, a time in with a teacher, used to regulate Billy's system, and it will help to move him back into a top-down control. So the consequence still is going to hold. Billy's not going to go to recess, but 10 minutes is likely all it's going to take to get him to keep from moving all the way down into that survival mode, as we saw in the actual event. But taking 10 minutes can seem impossible sometimes for a teacher because I know you have so many demands. I remember how many demands those are. But you know what? The alternative is not to take those 10 minutes and instead take a whole lot more time and energy of the staff, the principal, other teachers, the police, and also giving him this emotionally attuned conversation is giving Billy the experience of what it feels like to be in a positive and connected relationship. The more he experiences these types of interactions, the more he becomes equipped to handle the stress in the future on his own. And thus, the more Billy's going to have the ability to learn and to achieve academically because you took those 10 minutes with Billy. Okay, so let's talk about how do we change the window? So support of a teacher that was just modeled through an emotionally safe, nurturing, and calm relationship will allow the child's nervous system to calm down. So that was just modeled in the scenario that we just discussed. New neural pathways are created and those old behavioral programs can begin to be rewritten. Not right away, but with that time of you building that relationship and that time to see it from Billy's perspective. So I'm sure you've heard the term plasticity. So this refers to the body's ability to add and remove connections. So even into adulthood, but the brain is really the most plastic in childhood. Profound healing really occurs in the right environment when needs are met, when relationships offer acceptance, trust, and understanding, and when there are positive, repetitive experiences that override those past negative, repetitive experiences. So positive, repetitive experiences. You take those 10 minutes with Billy and you take those 10 minutes again with Billy because it's a whole lot less time than what you're going to take in the future, dealing with big problems and big temperamental behaviors from him. So developmental areas, the impact of early life experiences can be seen in 6 developmental areas. So cognitive development. So children develop in stages. So picture like a ladder, and they can't move to the next stage until they've mastered the stairs under them. Language development. So language equips a child to organize, symbolize, and express himself. Academic development, and what also goes into that academic development is positive attitude, self-discipline, being able to focus and have attention, organizational skills, social development, so being able to make friends, show empathy, enjoy the company of others. That physical development, so fine and gross motor skills, sensory skills, so hearing, vision, and touch. Emotional development, identifying, expressing, and coping positively with feelings. So children that don't have positive developmental areas that are developed well have trouble making friends, showing empathy towards others, waiting patiently, communicating anger in a healthy way, resolving conflicts peacefully, following rules, maintaining appropriate personal space, responding kindly to someone who's hurt, enjoying the company of others, or even maintaining eye contact, expressing themselves emotionally, correctly reading nonverbal communication. So being able to understand a teacher's requests of them, tolerating ups and downs in relationships. So let's look at the development of belief systems. So the external messages that our kids get become internal realities. So a child's mind is programmed by the experiences that he's had in this world. And this is software, and by how he perceives and operates in his daily situations. So beliefs are installed by a loving or a negative caregiver. So whoever that child's attached to, that's how they gain those beliefs. So optimistic viewpoints and belief systems are found in those with stronger immune systems. So wait, maybe this is a lesson for all of us. We need to have good immune systems, right? We need to be more optimistic. And how are we going to do that? So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get going. Beliefs inhibit academic performance. So negative reactions and harsh punishments create a kid who's really scared of making mistakes. Acceptance and validation are really what they need. So instead of saying, when they say, I'm stupid, and you say, no, you're not, you're very smart. Instead say, why do you feel that way? Listen and then say, that makes a lot of sense to me. I fully understand why you feel that way, why you don't want to do the assignment. This might be really hard to believe, but I know you really can do this. I have worked with a lot of kids and you really are capable. Let me help you. How can I support you? So it's kind of changing the way that they see themselves and the way what the things they believe about themselves. And it's your language and your support of them and encouragement that can do that, that can change that. So affirmation. So repetition is key. So upgrading the negative programming that they're used to hearing every single day of their lives with empowering, positive, energizing statements. So we have a lot of kids in this pandemic who have been living with negativity every single day. They have not been in school where they would have those positive opportunities with teachers daily and with peers. They're having negative every single day. So we're going to have some work to do when everything opens back up again. And we need to help them with their self-confidence. So I refuse to believe that I'm stupid anymore. I'm smart, and I know that now. So we have to help them with these affirmations and saying this to themselves. So emotional affirmations. So I refuse to believe that I'm unlovable any longer. I know I'm loved and I'm a very lovable person, and I understand that now. Or social, I refuse to believe that I'm disliked any longer. Friends like me, like Charlie and Jose, and I can accept that now. So it's constant repetition on helping them to say these things. And this is one strategy we can do with our students. It's helping them to learn these new phrases. So how about a teacher mantra? So move kids back to a stable point of reference when they are dysregulated. So helping to focus them in the emotional safety of that moment and of that classroom and of the time with you. So practice and repeat as prior to the behaviors occurring, and also as an emergency, as your 911. So the teacher can say, who's safe? And the student says, I am. Teacher, all of the time or some of the time? All of the time. Who's in charge to keep you safe? You are. So it's just that reminder all the time, and have the students repeat back to you that they're safe all the time and you're there for them all the time, not just sometimes, all the time. So of course, we're going to have some obstacles in some of the strategies we're talking about today, because there are going to be days when it seems like nothing's ever going to work. I've been there. I continue to be there in many different experiences with teachers that I'm working with, and also with some really difficult students internationally that I'm really trying to support. Students who have difficult and chaotic lifestyles that we've been talking about, they're not always going to respond to you when you're encouraging and positive. They're just not, because they don't believe that they deserve that love. Those past traumas is really their negative belief system that says to fight, suffer, and struggle. That's what they know. And that's how they've handled the chaos in their lives up until now. So at a conscious level, the student is really tired of the lack of peace and happiness, but they just don't know how to regulate themselves and get themselves back on track. So when nothing else can be done, the parameters must stay in place so that the student can continue to heal, even if it doesn't appear to be happening. So you still have to have your rules, and you still have to have your boundaries, because you have to allow them to push those boundaries so that your calm and supportive response can prove that you won't give up or get frustrated. This is not easy. This is not easy in parenting, and it's not easy in teaching. But by continuing to hold those boundaries tight when it's not easy for you, and you remaining calm continues to give them that chance that they're going to see a positive response, an encouraging response, and a loving response back. So what's really driving this kid's behavior? So you need to ask yourself as a teacher, what's really going on here? What does this child really need? This child really needs you. It really needs a regulated adult to keep calm and to offer support. And how can I change my perspective? Like if I haven't had a traumatic childhood or chaos in my life, you really need to try to understand and see the child's perspective and try to understand what he's feeling. Otherwise, you're never going to understand and you're never going to relate to that child on that emotional level. So what keeps me only looking at the behavior? Why do I only look at the behavior? Why don't I take the time to try to understand the child's background and where the child's been and what's going on a daily basis in that home? What is this behavior trying to communicate to me in the classroom and to peers? What in the environment could be triggering this behavior? So what happened right before this behavior occurred? And what can I do at this very minute? I want to improve my relationship with the student. How can I do that? How can I make this relationship safe? Start thinking of answers to these for the children that you're working with. Does this student need me to validate him, or what does he specifically need from me? How can I respond so he isn't threatened? What am I doing physically that's making him feel threatened? How can I physically position myself so that I'm not threatening? Should I sit down or squat next to him while I'm talking to him? How can I show I truly care? Am I showing that I'm exacerbated all the time with this kid? How can I be as authentic as possible and really show that I really do care? If I stop talking and I start listening, will he feel like he has more of a voice? Think of the example with Billy and the kid that was in the newspaper. How can I best serve him? I want to support this kid. That's why I'm a teacher. I want to support all kids. How can I do it best? So it's responding instead of reacting. So instead of saying, it's not that difficult, you can say, I need to know how hard this is for you. Talk to me, tell me, so I understand. Instead of saying, go to the principal's office, say, I'm here. You're not in trouble. I want to talk to you. I want to understand. Instead of saying, you're a teenager now and you need to learn how to deal with life, or you've grown up, you're a grown-up kid, or whatever you're going to say, you could say, I don't want you to be alone in this. Let me help you. I've been there. I've been a teen. I know it's tough. What about stop crying, stop being a baby, whatever. It's okay to feel. It's okay to have those feelings. It's okay to release some tears. You're so dramatic. You need to be heard, and I'm here, I'm listening. Say that instead. Stop acting like a baby. That really set you back. That really hurts you. I can tell. Talk to me about it. Instead of detention is waiting for you, say, sit here with me. Let's talk. Sit and work right next to me. Responding instead of reacting. What about instead of saying, stop being so needy? What is it you need help with? How can I help you? Instead of saying, you need to learn to be responsible, you could say, let's chunk this down so it's more manageable. Here, I'll help you. What about instead of saying, I can't help you with this issue. I have 35 kids in this class. I've heard that a lot, actually. Say, we'll get through this together. Every single student in this classroom is important. We are busy, but I care. I care about every one of you. Instead of, don't talk to me like that, you can say, you're allowed to have a voice. Let's talk together calmly. Let's talk about that so I can hear you. Instead of, stop whining, you could say, I want to understand you better. If I know how you feel, I'll be able to help you better. Use your voice so I can really understand. Instead of, you should never have acted like that, you could say, sometimes life gets too big, doesn't it? Instead of, I'm going to call your parents, wait till they find out. You could say, let's get everyone involved to support you. We all want to help you. We want to find a way to make this better. Instead of, act your age, you could say, this is way too big to keep to yourself. Talk to me about it so I can help you. Instead of saying, nobody's going to like you if you keep misbehaving, you could say, I know you want to be well liked, so let's make this happen. Instead of, you're old enough to handle this on your own, you could say, let's handle this together. We're in this together. I'm here for you. Or you need to be more like so-and-so. Parents say this a lot. Um, Instead, say every person in this class is important. So I know this might feels like you're coddling the student. So, it might feel like at first you're giving in, you're babying him, but this interpretation is really stemming from the traditional viewpoint that students simply misbehave out of choice. But students act out because they need attention. Ignoring the behavior, threatening the behavior, or controlling the behavior will only give them a negative form of attention. So this is extremely detrimental from the child's viewpoint because any form of attention is attention, whether it's positive or negative, and it's ultimately interpreted by the child. So we want to work to connect with the student on a positive way to meet his needs instead of trying to control him. So peaceful and loving outcomes can unfold naturally. That's our ultimate goal, isn't it? So it's going to take a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra thinking and some planning. So let's talk about a few extra strategies. So motivation. Have you ever heard this quote that sometimes even to live is an act of courage? And this is true of many of our students. So your job is to create a sense of community and belonging. So welcome every student as they enter your classroom. Ask a personal question about their morning, breakfast, or whatever activity they're involved with, sports, music, art, or about a friend. Be interested in their lives. Recognize if that mood might not be up to par that particular day and regulate rather than ignoring the mood or criticizing the mood. So calmly respond and be positive. So listen. You don't have to agree, but just listen. Smile and have soft facial reactions so students can feel your acceptance. Be interested in every student. What about sharing the students' ideas? Like, Billy had an awesome idea. I want to tell all of you guys about it. Okay, hold the phone. Listen to these ideas I just shared. Wait a minute, back up. These are social skills we all need to be having every day with everyone in our lives. And my guess is if we were to use all of these different strategies, being interested in each other, welcoming each other, asking questions of each other about things we know about each other because we're interested in them. I'm listening, I'm not doing all the talking. Oh my gosh, I bet I would be so much more popular if I did these things. Just a little tip, right? I'm here to help. Okay. So we're going to create a classroom designed for regulation. I used to have a kid, his name was Andy, when I was teaching high school, and I let Andy walk back and forth at the back of my room while I taught because Andy needed to walk. When Andy walked, he did awesome work. He actually would write his homework up against the wall or up against this old radiator. This classroom was an old classroom. And Andy did awesome work for me because I allowed him to move because he needed to move. He was no way going to be able to just sit in that chair. So he got his work done. He did well. He learned because it was a regulation focused classroom. He was allowed some movement. So think a rocking chair or let them rock. Think babies, how it taps into the feeling of being safe. Pacing. What about creating a pacing track in the back of a classroom with tape? I thought of this because of Andy. Andy could have used a tape. This would be the line. I don't want him like kicking other people and walking up to the front of the classroom and that kind of thing. So I'm going to have my boundaries with Andy. I'm going to give him that opportunity to move, but I'm going to put a piece of blue tape down so he knows his area. What about standing exercises? So in 10 minutes, 15 minutes into a lesson, have the kids stand up and allow them to work while they're standing from their desks, or give them a couple of exercises to do. Or sitting exercises, having those handheld squishy toys, fitness balls, that can really help those kids that are the fidgeters. Or movement through space. So think about spinning and twirling playground equipment can sometimes help regulate some kids that really need that type of movement. Or even bilateral activities. So have a jump rope. Allow them to crawl, or even riding a bike can help balance the body. So just some ideas on that regulated classroom. What about sound? So music. What about some soft music on in the classroom? White noise, or even some water fountains that create a sense of calm. I know people love sitting by water and having that nice calm sense that really relaxes them. Did you know that watching fish decreases blood pressure and lowers stress levels? Who knew? I guess I'm going to have to head to PetSmart and get a fish. I didn't even know this. Cuddly animals in the classroom can create a sense of calm. Okay, no, I guess I'm not going to get the guinea pig. Back to the fish. That works a little better for me. What about simplicity of decorations in your classroom? So decrease the wall and ceiling decorations. It's just too busy, and it keeps that feeling of chaos for kids that can't regulate their behaviors and their skills. What about considering lamps or warm lighting in a classroom to really keep the class calm? What about actually allowing kids food and water in class? Why are we so strict about that? Water hydrates their brain. Let's keep them regulated with food and water and some snacks throughout the day. Okay, what about thinking about how are you going to foster your relationships with your students? What about leaving a note on students' desks? Frequently, leaving little post-it notes, a little smiley face, thinking of you. I hope that baseball practice went really well last night. I hope things are going well with Jimmy that you played with after school. Um, Calling home often and sending home a note with positives about the day, not negatives. Send home those positives and continue to give them that personal attention every day. Greetings, conversations, listening, smiles, friendly eye contact. Ask them questions, be interested. Let the students hear you brag on them to others. Be interested in their personal interests. We need to do this in our daily lives. What a social skill. Be interested in others, right? So that relationship that you're building and you're modeling, by the way, with your students creates emotional security, which creates academic achievement because they're able to regulate and have calm relationships, calm reactions, peaceful reactions. They're learning by your model, by the way that you're responding to them. Okay, so your nonverbal communication. So keep your voice tone soft and calm and warm. My guess is with Billy's situation, our newspaper kid, they probably weren't soft, calm, and warm, right? Think about your posture. Be strong, but don't be defensive and threatening. What about your facial expressions? People have told me before that I look mad. So I really have tried, oh gosh, how am I looking mad? I want to soften up my facial responses. I don't want to look mad. So be aware of that. Um, Think about your gestures. So students who've been abused, if you work in a situation where you know that there are kids that have been physically abused, they can be really fearful of fast movements. Think about the intensity of your responses. This works with your spouse too, right? Your partner, haha. Lower your voice and be aware of your harshness, how harsh you sound in the classroom. Your timing and rhythm. So slow your speech down and use a much more loving rhythm, calmer rhythm. Proximity, don't stand too close if you think that's going to be threatening. So be aware of that proximity. And also the touch. If you feel like a student needs you to put your hand on their back, that'll help calm them, that would be completely okay to do. So think about that. And that would be creating that emotional space. So you're giving them acceptance, but you don't have to solve every issue. Not every issue is solvable, right? You're going to ask exploratory questions so that you can create a deeper understanding. That was modeled earlier within some of the statement scenarios that we talked about. Allow them to be upset and don't insist that they stop being upset. Nothing drives you more crazy if you're upset about something and someone doesn't allow you to be upset. So you have to accept the fact also that that child's reality is going to be skewed, and don't insist on your own reality, your own experiences, your own perceptions, because that child has had completely different experiences than you have had. So just be aware of that. Try to tolerate those negative and exaggerated feelings that the child might be expressing just to help them calm down. Giving understanding to the issue, even if you don't agree with it. And then listen with no agenda of trying to teach a life lesson. Just be there, be present, and listen, and give them those few minutes of time that'll de-escalate and help regulate that behavior. And engage in conversations, but don't insist on having the perfect answer or the perfect solution, but just be that listener and be there. So we've talked about our new approach. So the traditional approach is really consequence-based, and now we're really focusing on regulatory-based. Our traditional approach is rewards, to motivate kids, and we're trying to use relationships to motivate kids, and really building on fixing those impaired relationships from their childhood. What about external controls? All the different things like detention and stars and point charts, removal of privileges. We don't have to get rid of all that, but we can be thinking more along the lines of those internal controls, developing that sense of self-acceptance, self-love. What about the time in example that I gave you earlier with Billy, the more time in with that teacher versus a timeout? What about not having expectations just based on their age, but based on their social emotional age? Because we know that they have, many of them, their development has been stunted and they're not able to behave based on that chronological age. So we're going to focus more on stress management, how we can reduce that stress so we can help them regulate those behaviors. We're going to focus on family and community and not just individual. We're going to look more at prevention versus intervention. Of course, we're always going to be intervening in our jobs, but we're going to focus heavily on prevention. And then we want to fit our environment to that child and not just fit the child into the environment. So just with the mindset that stress drives that behavior. So creating that environment that's a non-stressful environment and helping them learn how to calmly and peacefully respond to different scenarios will really help. So words matter. What about instead of using attention seeking, we use seeks regulatory assistance? What about poor skills? Let's change that to underdeveloped skills. What about changing anger management to acting out behaviors? Doesn't this kind of skew the whole staff at your school and how we look at children that have trauma-based experiences? Changing avoiding activities to being overwhelmed by demanding activities. Changing does not know how to do this to needing support. Changing violating rules to unable to adhere to rules due to stress or to deregulation. So I kind of want to end with just a couple positive thoughts on we are servants. So be thinking of this quote, Martin Luther King Jr. Everyone has the power for greatness, not for fame, because greatness is determined by service. Tony Heisch, the CEO of Zappos, said, the best leaders are servant leaders. They serve those that lead. So service begins with empathy, and empathy is putting yourself in another's shoes. And that's what I'm encouraging you to do with our kids in our classrooms. So empathy is when you give up judgment for understanding. So when you can open up yourself to another's pain or fear or sense of being overwhelmed, that stress factor that a lot of our kids in trauma are responding to daily, you can have a deeper understanding of their needs and how you can help them. So leave this presentation with thinking about how can you serve those around you. So those kids in your classroom. So you're going to create a plan of action. I would absolutely love it. I'm dreaming on here, but I would love it if you would email me your plan of action for fun. Just share it briefly, just in a quick email. So what are 2 new ideas from this presentation that you plan to implement this week? What are you going to do now? What are you going to do differently tomorrow or for this week? And then what are 2 things that you're going to get rid of? So what resonated with you? So maybe a specific approach, a phrase, a perspective that you really want to be done with in your teaching. And don't worry, we all have them. So you can name just 2 things that you don't want to do anymore, that you're going to consciously try to change. Maybe a phrase you say to kids, maybe it's the comparison of your kids to someone else. How are you going to measure your success with this new approach, especially the 2 new things you're going to do, the 2 new positive behaviors? And then I want you to share this presentation with a friend or just talk about it with a partner and commit to an accountability partner, another teacher, an aide, maybe your administrator, and hold each other accountable for your 2 new ideas. And you can even share the 2 that you want to be done with if you feel like that's a safe person. And email me. I would love to hear what you're doing, what you're changing. It'll inspire me to continue to make changes in my behaviors in my teaching as well. So I want you to think about this. You're their person. So when they're feeling lonely, scared, or left out, you are their person. You might be that only person in the day that is there for that child. When they are excited about something and they need a listening ear, you're their person. When they're tired because of the chaos in their home or they're not feeling well, you're their person. When they're feeling anxious, confused, or uncertain, you're their person. When they simply need a little encouragement, you're their person. So, yes, it's going to be really overwhelming and it's exhausting and it's all consuming. But just remember, you're their person. And what a beautiful privilege that is. So, don't forget that. So, the last word is we cannot hold a torch to light another's path without brightening our own. Thanks so much for being a part of this webinar. I loved working with you, and I hope you'll email me your plan of action. Have a great day.